award you right now.
Welcome to the State Capitol Auditorium and to our presentation here regarding GMO labeling. My name is Dr. Melissa Yee. I'm the head of the Seeds of Truth organization, and we've been hosting panels throughout Oahu for the last 2 years. And we thank you for coming this evening. I know there were many choices between the Dalai Lama, chemtrails, and GMOs. So you chose to be here tonight. So I thank you very much for that. We're going to have our 3 panelists speaking for about 10 minutes each, 10-15 minutes each to introduce themselves. And then we'd like to have a lot more interaction between them and the group here. So if you don't mind moving closer to the front so you won't have as far to run if you'd like to ask a question. So after they've all 3 made their presentations, we invite you to come up to the front and take this microphone and pose the question so that we can capture it on camera for OLLO in the future. So those who are sitting in the back, do you mind sitting in the front? Please, come forward, don't be shy.
Everybody got their socks, don't worry.
Okay, I see many familiar faces, and I see people who maybe don't know very much about it. So I'd like you all to learn as much as possible this evening. And we're looking forward to a City Council meeting on April 25th at Kapolei Hale, where we will be presenting testimony. So we have various handouts there at the 2 tables. If you'd like to sign in and put your name on the email list, then you can be notified of when future events are coming up, as well as how to prepare your testimony for April 25th. This is a labeling bill that was presented by Councilmember Tulsi Gabbard to label genetically modified whole produce and fish, things that are grown here in Hawaii. And this is kind of the last effort on the part of legislators to get something introduced and passed. This particular year in the legislative session, there were actually several bills that were introduced regarding whole produce as well as labeling all GMO. But unfortunately, because of lack of support from the Agriculture Committee members and the chairs of both the Agriculture Committee and the Health Committees, none of these bills or resolutions were introduced or heard. So we're very disappointed about that, and therefore we're here tonight to rally support for this upcoming resolution, which will be heard in City Hall on April 25th. So if you're at all interested, please come join us in Kapolei Hale and offer testimony and help us in the upcoming legislative session to get a bill passed. So I'd like to introduce now our 3 panelists. We have Dr. Hector Valenzuela, who is a professor at University of Hawaii, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. He's been speaking out at a lot of the panels that we've held, and we're very fortunate to have his knowledge and expertise here tonight. Then we have Danny Bishop, who is a former fireman and presently a taro farmer out in Kahalu. And he also has much experience from the time when the taro was an issue, the genetically modified taro that so many of us were concerned about would be the start of GMO here in Hawaii. Fortunately, the Hawaiians were able to stop it, and now we're not having to deal with GMO taro, but we're still looking at GMO extensively grown here on all the islands. So lastly, we have Dr. Phil Bariano, who is from the University of Washington. He's a lawyer, he's a professor at the university, and is very, very knowledgeable, has at least 30 years of expertise in the technology of GMO as well as legislation. And Washington State has introduced various bills regarding labeling, and we'll hear from him where they've gone and what we're going to do next. Because we really would like to have labeling, but we see a lot of resistance from the corporations. So we'll learn more about that tonight. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Valenzuela. Let's give him a hand.
Hi, everybody. I would like to
First, thanks Phil for coming over and sharing his experience for many years of working since Rio 1992 and so on. And I would like to give an overall perspective, kind of to set the stage from my angle. And I think we're dealing about two things. One is our diets, the food that we're consuming on the one side, and on the other side, what is the future of the agriculture in the state, the agricultural lands, in what direction is it going to go into the future? Is it going to be more plantations, or are we going to change to something, to a different kind of paradigm? And I think overall we're talking about the self-named or self-proclaimed masters of the universe. And these are the so-called Wall Street bankers, investment bankers that for many years have been telling us how we are supposed to run our economy. And in the agricultural world, we also have the masters of the universe that have been telling us how are we supposed to be running our agriculture or farming. And this is where the Industrial Revolution came, the Green Revolution came up, the use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. And I call GMOs kind of the industrial agriculture version 2.0, because now we have pesticides, and on top of that we have the patenting of crops, which means that they have one more hold in terms of what the farmer is doing in terms of their activities. So last year in Hawaii, we had the APEC meeting, the Asia Pacific meeting, and these were basically a meeting of the masters of the universe that come up and tell us and also Asia, the other countries in Asia, how they're supposed to do their economy and their agriculture. So if you look at the documents, the policy documents behind APEC, you will see we should leave it up to the free markets. We should deregulate, no need for regulations. In terms of energy, we should push for nuclear energy. And in their internal documents, they say they criticize the media because the media overemphasizes the risks of nuclear energy and de-emphasize the benefits of nuclear energy. And then they also talk about biotechnology, and they sponsor biotech conferences in the Philippines and Thailand and so on to promote that kind of industry. So that's kind of the vision. So in 2009, after the global economic crisis, because of the housing crisis and so on, I think government official from China was saying, so these professors have been telling us what to do for so many years, and now we realize that they didn't know what they were talking about in terms of the economy. So today, there was an article in the New York Times about what they're calling the suicides by economic crisis. And these are suicides in Europe, in Greece, in Italy, in Ireland, because of the default of the economy. The things turn upside down. People are taking their own lives. And this is because we put our hands of the economy on the hands of the bankers and so on, and they kind of just run everything afoul. And from the agriculture standpoint, we have our own version of suicides at a much larger schedule, which we are. The classic example is in India, where perhaps 250,000 people have killed themselves because they have adopted a method of farming that involves getting yourself in debt because you have to buy the whole technology package, which involves pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and more recently, you have to actually buy the seed. In the old days, we used to keep our own seed every time that we plant, but now the package includes an additional debt burden. So the market is so volatile that suddenly the prices go down in cotton, so you cannot pay all your inputs. So this is where we have all the suicides that we have been observing. So all the stories that we have been hearing about from the masters of the universe are kind of falling apart. And recent examples were the accident in Fukushima, and I haven't heard of General Electric stepping up and saying, okay, we're going to pay for setting up a plant that didn't work properly. We had the accident in the Gulf of Mexico, the BP accident, and farmers from all over the world are reviewing the industry of GMOs. And I think there was a report that recently come up and saying GMOs are really not working for our small communities. So in terms of there's an increasing international consensus in terms of the food and agriculture industries. In terms of our diet, the American Medical Association has come up with a policy statement saying we really should change the way we're consuming our diets. We should really change our diets away from highly processed products, which are based mostly on subsidized GM crops like soybean and corn and cotton and rape, and move towards more whole-based diets of whole fruits and vegetables, which are better for our consumption. So that's from the diet perspective. And from the agricultural perspective, there's an increased scientific global consensus that is also saying, we should shift away our methods of agriculture away from industrial methods of production, and we should be moving more towards ecologically based production systems. And if you're interested in looking into this, you can Google IAASTD, which is a global study of about 400 scientists from about 60 countries, funded by the United Nations and by the World Bank. And after this 4 or 5 year study, they came up with this kind of assessment saying we should move away from energy intensive production methods towards more small scale agroecological type of farming. So we should move towards small scale farming and alternative methods of production. And this assessment actually came up back in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. And this is where the first assessment came saying about moving towards sustainable agriculture. And I guess Phil was involved in Rio 92, so maybe he can comment about it. And the US, since 92, was almost alone in the world in turning back with these proposals about alternative farming, and also with the Kyoto Protocol, which was brought up in 92 Earth Summit of Rio. So in terms of what we should be pushing for in Hawaii is first to promote the concept that small farms are real farms, and that small farms are actually more productive and more beneficial for the economy and for small communities, and as a source of employment. Our current agricultural policies are currently more directed towards GM seed crop production and also towards biofuel production. So we have to shift that emphasis away from, again, industrial ag version 2.0. So I think we have to change our paradigm in terms of where we're going. And this is part of the discussion that we're having about GMOs, their potential health impacts, and the future of ag in Hawaii. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and hopefully we can have more discussion later. Thanks.
So now we have Danny Bishop, who I've gotten to know over the last years, a very wonderful man who speaks from the heart. He farms taro out in Kahalu, and is a really hardworking person who is going to tell it like it is today. So, Danny Bishop.
Mahalo, Dr. Yee. Aloha all. First, I'd like to start with thanking Dr. Yee and her helpers for working tirelessly over the last couple of years, but mostly this past year, just organizing these events, getting out to the community, educating a lot of people from the bottom up. Just amazing work ethic. And Juanita back there, she's been very, very active in trying to get organized. Thank you all for coming. I want to show you a label. I have a label on, and excuse me. Okay? That's my label. I think labels are important. They convey a message. Okay? What we're asking for in labeling of our foods are, as far as I can see, is that we're trying to determine a standard of a quality of life. We prefer a quality of life. We prefer the right to choose on how we can live our lives, whether it be, and we choose it through information and action. And most of us here, I mean, these two guys, they got all the information as to the science. I can't talk about science, but what I can talk about are lifestyles. Okay, I came from a Hawaiian family who grew up being disconnected from being Hawaiian, because that's the time that I grew up. During the struggle to regain kaho'olawe, my father, half Hawaiian, my grandmother, pure Hawaiian. Look at those stupid Hawaiians, they don't know what they're talking about. Nobody can live on kaho'olawe. Since that time, and I'm getting I'm talking about lifestyles and perspectives. I'm going to get totally away from genetic modification and go towards lifestyles and choices and actions that we can take. So this group of Kanaka who knew their heritage, who knew their history, the correct history, changed. They through political activism, made a change, and we have kaho'olawe back. Since that time, the Hawaiian people, or the citizens of Hawaii and a larger community internationally, have been educated as to the facts of what happened here in 1893 and prior to that and since then. That that Hawaii is now the longest military occupied country in the history of the world. We were taken over illegally. We remain occupied. The occupying entity controls 1/3 of our land and pays no rent. I mean, instead of legalizing gambling, why don't we just... Anyway, what I'm trying to get to is that I believe that through open minds, and I mean, all of you here are very, very highly motivated, highly educated people. Keep an open mind as to what sovereignty or reinstating the nation of Hawaii can do for us as citizens and our quality of life. Can it regain our land base? Can it control immigration? Can it control job security to a certain extent? Other countries around the Pacific have these in place. As long as we are under the United States rule, we are not able to do these things. Will we have corruption in the politics if we become? Yes. Will those corrupt individuals have to face the consequences of their decisions? And will their next generations face the consequences of their decisions? Yes. Will they be answerable more intimately to us? Yes. So my perspective here is, I'm not trying to disrespect anyone who wants to be a good American. I just hope that they don't want to disrespect me because I want to be a good Hawaiian. And it is my right to be a good Hawaiian, just as it is your right to be a good American if you choose to. So please, when you leave here tonight, if you have some doubts about what sovereignty can bring you, do your homework. Just look into it. If you think that I'm lying about the illegal overthrow, look it up. Was there a treaty of annexation? Look it up. Was there a treaty signed by the President of the United States at the time of the overthrow to reinstate the Queen? Look it up. We are illegally occupied right now. And sooner or later, people with conscience, because all of us have, there's a moral majority out there throughout the world who believe in right. And sooner or later, right will be done. And we will get to that point where we will have self-determination. We will have control of immigration. We will have these things. We will not have to pay federal taxes. We will not have to, we're not a manufacturing entity. Why should we have to abide by trade laws? The marketplace out there has better products than what America makes, but we have to use American goods because of trade laws with America. I'm really getting way off the subject. What I'm just trying to do is just talk about, look at alternatives and what this might bring to us. Quality of life that we can have a better impact on. Goes back to labeling, information, and action. Thank you, guys.
Actually, I'd like to thank Senator Gabbard for allowing us to be here tonight, and also Hawaii Seed, which has contributed to a lot of the activities that we've been holding in different places, and Down to Earth, which put out a wonderful flyer. So all these entities have worked together with us, and we're getting something done. It's really phenomenal to see how in just the last 2 years a great awakening has occurred, that people in just a short time are becoming informed and educated and want to do something. The first step is labeling, but as Danny is saying, we have to go farther and further with that, because we've given all our rights away, we've given away our freedom, and the time is coming where we're going to balance that. So now we have Dr. Phil Bariano, and he's from the University of Washington, and is going to share with you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Can you hear? Okay, cool. Before we got started, Danny was talking to me a bit about Hawaiian history, and I appreciate very much learning already in a couple of minutes here tonight a great deal that was never taught to me when I went to school. So I want to offer my appreciation for that perspective. Unfortunately, I know from experience doing work internationally with regard to GMOs that many independent countries have been manipulated by the masters of the universe that Hector talked about. And so while sovereignty could certainly address certain realities and historical injustices, it's not so clear to me, I'll be a little bit pessimistic maybe, that sovereignty would necessarily be a solution to GM issues. So I'm here to talk about GM issues, not Hawaiian history. I can only learn about Hawaiian history. Let me talk a little bit. I'm not a biologist, and I want to start by giving you a non-biologist view about what genetic engineering is, because maybe most of you, like most of me, like I at one time, don't really know what's going on here. Genetically modified crops or organisms usually have genetic material inserted. It could be taken out or moved around or whatever, but usually have material inserted from another living organism. But it's not just the genes from that organism. They're put into what's called a package or a cassette with other genetic materials. For example, bits of viruses, because viruses are very good at getting past an organism's defenses to, right? Influenza virus, for example. Other genetic materials that basically will switch on or switch off properties in the gene, etc., promoters they're called. So none of this would occur in nature. First of all, the two parent organisms by definition would not be mating in nature. And secondly, you wouldn't get all this other stuff coming in at the same time. So that's a non-scientist's view of what genetic engineering is. Now, the most widely grown GM crops today in the world have only two characteristics that were engineered into them. One are being tolerant to an herbicide, particularly a specific herbicide, Roundup or the equivalent from other companies, or insect resistant. The insect resistance is obtained by using genetic material from a soil bacterium called Bt. And Bt is, by the way, allowed to be used on organic crops, but it's sprayed on the crops, it'll last for a few days, it washes off and so forth. Bt, genetically engineered, is in every cell of the plant all the time through the whole life. So, for example, soil organisms, which would not at all come in contact with Bt from plants which are sprayed from it, could and would come in contact with the root systems of a Bt engineered plant. We have no idea, no one is doing any work about what that might lead to or do. Okay? So, the first thing that you hear, and I'm going to build up to why label, but why label is because, one, it's different, even though you hear that it's not different. Okay? And by the way, the companies that are saying to us that it's not different go to the patent office and say, it's completely novel, it's completely different, you have to give me a patent on it. Okay? So we should not be taken in by this. Now, when you look at the merits of GM crops, you might ask questions such as these. Are they capable of sustainably improving agricultural productivity at a reasonable cost and without imposing severe environmental and human health impacts or unduly disrupting the social and cultural fabric of society? That first question, it's important because sometimes they claim that we're anti-technology. Now, I flew here today. We're in an air-conditioned building. I might have some synthetic fabric, I don't know, in my clothing. Okay? No one who opposes GM or raises questions is against technology. And you have to stand up and tell them that it's nonsense. Okay? So that's the very first thing. The issue is, like all things, are we getting more than it's costing us, if you want to do it on that basis, right? And while different people have different assessments of that, yeah, we know that flying in an airplane produces pollution and stuff like that. On the other hand, I couldn't be here. I couldn't have this lovely lay on and stuff like that if it were not for the airplane, to be realistic in this day and age. So, okay, the second question. Have the initial promises and claims of each genetic innovation been met? And I'm going to go through some of the claims and show you that, in fact, none of them have been met. And this is the kind of information that people increasingly need to be able to counter what's going on. And by the way, you can find an expanded version of what I'm using for notes, including lots and lots of links. I'm only going to be able to mention things at the website of an organization called AgriWatch that I'll talk to you about, but the URL is www.seattleglobaljustice, all one word, .org/agra, A-G-R-A -watch. Okay? The third question that you might want to ask is, does a focus on GM crops divert attention in developing nations and in developed ones from other cost-effective, practical, and efficient agroecological means to increase local food security, food sovereignty, and agricultural production? Okay? So those are the sorts of general questions I think it's fair to ask. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about entering into those questions, but then we've agreed that we're sort of going to take a break. We don't want you sitting for a long time, and start to respond from questions or concerns that you might have. And I know I have a lot of stuff that I could just go babbling on for hours tonight. But that's not respectful of people, because you have things to share and you have questions that can inform our discussion and so forth. So give me a few more minutes and then we'll take that kind of a discussion break, okay? GM crops were developed by major agricultural chemical companies, and these companies, as you probably know, control the majority of the world's seed market. This is quite historically unique and, of course, quite historically troubling, because it wasn't so long ago that the majority of the world's seeds were controlled by farmers, small farmers, in innumerable communities around the globe. Now, there still are lots of seeds controlled by those farmers, or farmers like them. But increasingly, those seeds are being pushed out of the way by the industrially produced seeds owned by the seed giants. And that's a whole set of propaganda and techniques, the sociology of the whole operation, how they get the agricultural schools in not only in the States, but in different countries to buy into it. They train the foreign students at the schools in the US, who then go on to become proponents of this, because this is what they've learned. They all read the same magazines and journals, et cetera, et cetera. The first thing they tell you is not to worry, because GM crops are under control by the scientists and the biotech industry developing them. We can talk about why that's not true. Then they say GM crops would increase food production for the growing global population. And we can talk about why that's not true and hasn't been happening. They say that increased yields would then reduce the demand for agricultural land, and that's not true. In fact, one of the major things that's happening in Africa and elsewhere in the global south is that certain countries are buying up huge tracts of lands. China, Saudi Arabia, India are buying up large tracts of Ethiopia, for example. And they're not doing it in order to feed Ethiopians. Okay? Less water would be required to grow them. Well, that's not true necessarily either, because most species have scores, if not hundreds, of varieties, including many which are drought tolerant. Okay? So rather than, of course, going to farming communities, for example, that experience drought and have been farming corn successfully for millennia, the Gates Foundation, Monsanto are trying to develop something called WEMA, Water Efficient Maize for Africa. This will be a high-tech seed, probably patented by Monsanto, which then will be sold to African farmers, where there exist in Africa drought-tolerant varieties of maize, of corn. Poor farmers would be the prime beneficiaries. I do a lot of work in Seattle, and again, I can talk about this more if you'd like, trying to oppose the activities of the Gates Foundation in African agriculture. The Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, of course, is not a farmer, and he's not an African, but he is now all of a sudden the world's expert on African agriculture. This is what several $1 billion do. You don't have to get an education, you just have to have a fat wallet. And then you can be invited to Davos and tell people from third world countries what they should be doing. Okay, it's amazing. It's a miracle, actually.
It's been going on here for 100 years.
What?
It's been going on here for 100 and some odd years.
So one of the things the Gates Foundation realizes that the kind of high-tech ag policies they are going to, that they're pushing, will actually drive farmers off the land. And these farmers will be, in fact, going into the large cities like Nairobi and so forth. And they call this land mobility. And land mobility, according to the Gates people, is actually beneficial because the cities are the centers of modernization. And their populations become better educated and more urbanized and better modernized, as opposed to backward farmers. Now, if this isn't a version of the white man's burden, I don't know what is. Okay? Okay? That Gates and his huge multi-billion-dollar foundations just built a new corporate headquarters in Seattle. They got the city council to close off 6 streets for them. You know, yes, Bill, of course. What can we do for you? Yes. Land mobility. This kind of propaganda is literally, and people believe it. They believe it. By the way, they believe it. Okay? We have to understand that, you know, these people are probably all in favor of a woman's right to control her own body and her own reproductive system. They're all in favor of non-discrimination and everything. We have to understand this, okay? They're not some kind of necessarily evil people like the caricature with a long mustache and so forth, you know, tying little Nell to the tracks as the train comes rushing down. They believe their own propaganda. And we can get into some of how you might approach that, but that's the sociology. I mean, you find that if you investigate it. Then, of course, they say that GMO crops are environmentally okay, which they're not. Then they say GM crops would reduce agricultural chemical and pesticide use, which they have not done. Then they say GM crops would be more nutritious. No GM crops have been produced that are more nutritious. That hasn't been their goal. GM crops do not require testing as they're equivalent to natural crops. Well, of course they're not. So those kind of claims, and the document that I referred to, it's called Countering Corporate Propaganda. When you go on that website, we'll give you lots of links to materials that counter each one of these things, which we can go into later if you want. But I'm going to stop now and turn it back over to Dr. Yi, okay?
Okay, this is going to be a wonderful evening. I would like to ask those who would propose a question to come up to the front, and I'm going to go down to the floor and hand you the microphone so that you can speak into the microphone, and then ask any of these gentlemen your question, and we'll proceed from there. So if you can just come to the front here and identify yourselves and then pose your question.
Hi, my name is David. What I question is, why isn't the governor here? Why isn't, I don't think any of the state legislators are here. And who's paying off who? I mean, from what I understand, the governor and most of the legislators have gotten pretty good substantial campaign contributions from Monsanto. And would that be one reason why they would want to be here? Because, you know, and I would think that this would be a very important thing to be here, because you're talking about our freedom of choice, of knowing what we're consuming. And I thought that was what we were all about, you know. I mean, okay, we'll let you have choices to have GMO foods if you want, but we want a label on it so you know what it is. Anyway, without the, I mean, I don't understand why the government and some of these legislators don't understand how absolutely important this is to our health and our freedom. Anyway.
One comment that I had when I was talking about the future of agriculture in Hawaii. So today we have about 5 or 6 of the major seed companies located in Hawaii doing field research. So one of my concerns is that because these companies are so big and powerful and have so much money and a stronghold on politicians, that these companies, even though they're not growing food, they are helping to dictate the future of agricultural policy in the state. So when Governor Abercrombie was campaigning and he set up a food panel on television, one of the 3 people that was on that panel was the GMO seed industry. And they're not growing any food, so what were they doing on a food panel? And when these companies start to contribute a lot of money to, for example, UH, the College of Ag, like money for education for the curriculum of children or for scholarships, my concern is that all of these monies may start to affect the color of the perspective of the administrators in terms of what should the future of agriculture be for the state. So that again, when we look at the future, it may be, maybe GM seed production might be a good idea for the state.
It's a great question. couple of years ago, we had I made a big boo-boo. I went to a hearing. The chair of the hearing's name was Cliff Suji. It was the Agricultural Committee. And we were asking for a moratorium on genetically modified taro. Cliff Suji represents the Big Island of Hawaii. His county passed legislation restricting taro and coffee research, genetic modification, whatever, within their county. So I asked Mr. Suji, who do you represent? And I started my little thing out, well, I'm here to call a kettle black. Who do you represent? Your constituents voted to keep this off your island. And yet you're over here not letting this out of your committee, this bill out of your committee. And I felt, after, I was angry. When I left that hearing, I felt, wow, I need to tell him I'm sorry. I should not be doing that in a public forum to an elected official. Guess what? Cliff Suji, who are you representing? Cliff Suji. How dare you not pass it out of legislation again, out of your committee again? And for our chairperson, I forget who he was, one of the other committee chairs, his reason for not passing it out of his committee was that he did not have enough information. I don't have a staff. I don't have a staff. I don't have people. I Googled. And I've participated here. I get a lot of emails now. The information is there. How dare this elected official who has a staff, how dare they say it? I call reasons and excuses. A reason is a reason, an excuse, poor. Ole. Don't give me an excuse, give me a reason. And for that person to say, not enough information, baloney. This stuff has been on the files here for at least 4 years, genetic modification. Labeling's fairly new, because what's his name? Never mind. I really didn't want to come and be on any more panels, but I'm so pissed off that maybe I won't be invited back to any of these things because of, I have a mean quality of life. I'm in the taro patch, and when I pull weeds, it's quiet. It's quiet. I'm to myself, surrounded by my akua, my kupuna, under the mountains that are named for my family. And I get to internalize, and I get to think, and I think about all you people out there who deserve this kind of quality of life, who deserve a space for yourself, to be quiet. And I'm so lucky I got that, but we all deserve that. And that perspective of the American dream has been changed from a roof, clothing, shelter, food, to mass quantities that 10 generations are not going to be able to spend, but I need to accumulate it for ego and power. We live in Hawaii. The grasshopper and the ant do not apply here. We should have that quality of life that we all want here, and our great-grandchildren deserve that, and their great-grandchildren deserve that. And deoccupy Hawaii, and we might have a chance. Yes, corruption. Yes, big dollars will buy politicians. They already are in this system here. Let's try a new system. Thank you.
I'm not going to comment on Hawaii politics. If you want to talk about Washington politics, I'll be happy to. But I do want to sort of say it's not just corruption. If you think the only problem is that people are handing over money, you're only looking at part of the problem. My dear friend Danny, please.
No, that's true.
It's a mindset, okay? Okay? When I was doing graduate work at Cornell, there was a Chilean family that took care of my son while I was at class and my wife was at work. and it was cool. There was Spanish speaking in the house, so he had exposure to the language and everything. That grad student who was going to Cornell's Ag School has been head of the Biotech Commission of Chile for the past dozen years. Okay? This is how it works. What did he learn at Cornell, which is one of the major centers of genetic engineering? Okay? What journals does he read? Who does he correspond to? Okay? You don't have to give a packet of money. That's not the only way that it's done. That's the point I want to make. Packets of money do get exchanged, but that's not the only way that it's done.
Thank you.
I was just telling Dr. Ye I have more than one question. My name is Mary Oyama, and I have been going to town hall meetings and speaking on the subject. I'm no expert in any field at all. But one of the things that I have heard the biotech companies say is that this has been occurring in nature for thousands of years. Can you elaborate, Dr. Barry, on how they're able to get patents on it? If it's
It hasn't been occurring in nature for thousands of years. And I'll let my biologist friend talk about it more specifically. What they are doing is they're using the term biotechnology to refer to something much broader than the way we've been using it here. Biotechnology in some circles means genetic engineering, which means artificial manipulation. But then you get the line that, oh, biotechnology means any technology that involves biology, like cheese making or bread making. And we've been doing it for thousands of years. So that's one level at which they try and confuse people, okay, by the use of the term biotechnology. Secondly, they will refer to a fact that there are very rare and specific instances that are known to scientists where unrelated species do combination. The canker sores on trees, whatever they're called. It's very rare. It's very rare. But they can always say this does happen in nature. There's also something called horizontal gene flow, which is very, very, very rare in nature, but much more common with biotech, because remember, what's flowing is not just the foreign gene, but the whole packet might be flowing, might be jumping out, and with all of the parts it has in order to get in there and do its stuff. So the fact of the matter is, and I would like Hector to comment to this, that it's not true. It's not true. And we all need to have some of this information in order to counter that.
Well, I think it comes down to an issue of democracy, of people being informed. But the strategy of the industry has been, well, we know better. Again, we're the masters. We know better, and the public does not need to be bothered with the facts. So today we find ourselves that we have been consuming GM crops for 15 years and we don't know about it. So now that there's some discussion going on, it's actually a disservice claiming to talking about GMOs and saying that this is something that has occurred all the time. And I think the key word that they're using is modified. Crops have been modified for ages, and it's not true. Crops interchange genes between the same species, not with foreign species, and genetically modified crops is something that has never before existed in nature. So when you start mixing terms, it's really an effort to confuse the public about the real issues.
I was also at a neighborhood board meeting where one of our state representatives stated that all bananas in the state of Hawaii have been genetically modified. Is that true? Because I have a banana tree in my yard.
Well, again, I think it's a disservice claiming maybe this person doesn't know himself because he was told that by professors or so on, but it's really a disservice to confuse when you're trying to confuse the public in such a way. Bananas have genes only from bananas and not from tomatoes or goats or cows, and it's something that really hasn't happened before. On the other hand, horizontal gene transfer does occur sometimes in nature, but that is actually a risk because you don't want genes from genetically modified crops to say from a virus to transfer to a soil, a microorganism in the soil. So that's actually a potential risk, which we wouldn't want to happen.
Okay, one last question. We're pushing.
Can I just ask, aren't bananas, though, essentially clones of each other? I mean, isn't there a single, the Cavendish banana and so forth?
Correct.
Maybe that's what he means, that they were all, or most of them were grown up from parts of a single tree or their descendants by, some plants are very easy to clone. That's how we grow from leaf cuttings. That's a clone and so forth. And my understanding is that, for example, all of the commercial bananas in the States are essentially clones of. So that may be another way to confuse you, using language to confuse you.
Okay. One last question. We are pushing for labeling here, and one of the stories that I saw come across on the internet is that Monsanto is threatening to sue the state of Vermont if they should enforce labeling. Are you aware of any stories like that or situations in other states?
Now that's unfair because you asked me that question before. Okay, but let's share it with the whole audience. I'm teasing you. Vermont, a number of years ago, passed legislation to require that all milk from cows that were injected with recombinant bovine growth hormone be labeled. And Monsanto sued the state, and at the appellate court, the state lost. Many lawyers, especially lawyers who've been winning lately, such as the folks from the Center for Food Safety who have taken the cases against genetically modified alfalfa and sugar beets and so forth, think that there are ways around the view of that appellate court in the Vermont case. I am sure that any state who is the first state, and this is one of the things that we all have to deal with, we had to deal with it as an undercover issue in Washington, the first state that steps out is going to be hit by litigation, of course. Wouldn't you do it if you were in Monsanto? Of course you would. You don't want it to spread. It's costly. States have tight budgets these days. So I'm sure that that's correct. The thing is that legislators need to have backbones, right?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. Seattle, I didn't get your name, sir. That was Dr.
My name?
Yes.
Beriano, Philip Beriano.
Beriano. Good Italiano.
No, it's Romanian, but everyone in Italy thinks it's Italian, so don't worry
I know
about it.
Hector and I know Danny, so welcome.
Thank
My
you.
name is Ron Carlson, and I'm more focusing on the levers of power that we can start to pull. We as the people, the general populace here, who want quality of life and also want to see the power return to the proper level of society, from my point of view. The New Rules Project, are you familiar with that?
Van Jones? No?
Up in New Hampshire.
No, I'm not.
Anyway, it's a group that talks about, it's a legal initiative that talks about the power of the people at the county level. I think it was in New Hampshire or Maine, one of the northeastern smaller states, that initiated the community level, at the county level, of taking away the personhood of the corporation.
Oh, right.
You've heard of this? Do you know much about that in Seattle?
It's not very strong in Seattle, but particularly, but this kind of stuff is going around. I think there were places in Pennsylvania that have done it.
Yeah, like in Mendocino County, they had an initiative in which they prohibit now the use of genetically modified seeds, I guess, in Mendocino County. Is that right, Hector?
Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with the personhood of corporations.
No, but
Oh,
they
okay.
did that in New Hampshire, and it was very successful against Nestle. They stopped the usurpation of the water supply up in that area, as best I can recall. And they literally said, through a county ordinance, this is at the county level, not at the state or federal, that they took away the personhood, and it was not attacked to my knowledge. In other words, the corporation, Nestle, did not go after it. Maybe you have more information. The reason I mention this is here locally, many years ago, Dr. Yee was involved with this. We were able to, through the county, to stop the community fluoridation of water. The reason I bring it up, I'm a dentist, and so I've been practicing here since 1970. I used to go lockstep with the Dental Association and think community water fluoridation was the best thing for the teeth of the keikis of Hawaii. You know, it was all really terrible. So in 1980, 81, 82, I began to read some of the research that I hadn't received in dental school in the 60s and found out there's a lot of question about the use of fluorine in human beings. My background is chemistry and physics, so I was concerned with that. But the point I'm getting to is that we were successful at the county level in having the community water fluoridation issue protected Hawaii, at least in this county. And that was through the City County Council, 7-2 actually, that said that no, nothing would be put in the community water supply that would prevent or treat a disease. And there were two county council members that were really adamant about, well, we think that we should be able to, in the case of some kind of cataclysmic fallout of bacteria, that we should be able to put certain types of antibiotics in the water supply to protect the people. This is the kind of thinking that we came across. And of course, we changed our name from the Anti-Fluoridation League to the Pure Water Foundation. And that made a big difference because we didn't assault them or attack them. So the reason of my jumping in, and I appreciate my colleagues here for letting me jump forward, is I wanted to look at that issue tonight as something that we could begin to, the New Rules Project, to really get this conversation going about the power at the county level, because most people think that their state legislator, senator, and or congressman, or the governor will take care of these things. And so I really feel that's something that I would like the gentleman to address.
I do have a law degree, by the way, which wasn't mentioned, so I will take a crack at this, but of course I'm not a legal expert on this. In almost every state, and I assume in Hawaii, counties are just creatures of the state government. That's to say, they are created, they are amalgamated, they are split up, whatever, by the state government. I mean, in Hawaii, I guess your counties are a little bit more preformed by nature than is true in most other states. So counties, if you have to look at the particular state, okay, and counties can have any level of power that the state wants to assign to counties. And in some states, counties may have a great deal of power, and in some states they may not. And it may vary by subject matter. So one of the things the biotech industry is trying to do, for example, to respond to the 5 counties in California that have tried to adopt or adopted GMO-free, no planting of GMOs, is to remove the power from county governments to determine what crops can or cannot be grown. I don't know how they legally phrase it or not, okay? Now, in some states, maybe counties don't even have that power to begin with. So the very first thing, if you're interested in power at the county level, is to understand in Hawaii, for example, what the distribution of power is. And that doesn't mean it's anything like in New Hampshire or New York or Pennsylvania or whatever. And then you have to look at topic by topic. Okay. For example, on financial matters, very often counties are limited what they can go into debt for, what they can't, how much they can spend, how they can budget, how they can tax. Okay, and there's no uniform rule in the 50 states. In that regard, the states are independent.
Yeah, no, I agree with your legal assessment. I think that's a common understanding at the county level, the state rules. However, if you look in the history of the United States, if my history reading is correct, the states would not apply for statehood until they had a certain number of counties that determined that they would apply for statehood. So it's actually the opposite. The county rules, the state.
I don't believe.
I know.
My own understanding of history is quite different.
Right, and
Congress established minimum population requirements and set up territories, and after they hit certain population things, they had to petition.
Correct. The counties did.
No, the states did. Counties have no independent legal existence in the United States in most states, as far as I know.
Well,
it's a question of state law.
That's something we could find out.
Yeah, easily. And what you find out about Hawaii has no particular relevance to any other state, is what I'm saying.
Okay, good. That's number one.
Just like cities. Cities and the annexation and the size of cities, and can cities take over another? That's all a matter of state law, which varies completely from one state to another.
I think it's a worthy topic to look into for yourself as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Number two is we found that the power at the level of the county was greater because we had greater access to our councilmen. With the state, we couldn't get any traction in the issue. They were not listening. But at the county level, where the people were actually walking into the county council and actually dialoguing with the councilmen, and we had a great number of people involved at that time, probably about 70 or 100. The council then took note that this is an issue that they need to look at.
Sure.
Okay, so
Sure.
I'm saying here to something to explore is at the county level. That's basically it. Thank you for your...
Oh, hi, everybody.
Uh-huh.
My name is Daniel Anthony. Thank you, Dr. Phil. I now realize I'm a part of the Hawaiian biotechnology industry, coming poi traditionally. And I like the fact that we're all talking about the past, but my question really is about the future. So for one, I look in the crowd, I don't see too much farmers, and I don't see too much young people. If you guys want to make a difference and you want to make a change, we need farmers and young people. Because what Danny's talking about in sovereignty relates to this food issue. We got no food, we got no leverage. We got no control. A bunch of, I don't want to be rude, but it's a bunch of politicians and old folks. And you know what I'm saying? We need young, we need farmers. How do we get those? Two, you know, are we going to wait for our politicians, right? Or are we just going to go out and start labeling it ourselves? My question to you, you have a law degree, I got a GED, is if I Google my kids, right, take my kids and Google and we research, what would be one of the best websites that would tell me what products would contain genetically modified foods in the marketplace today? And two, what do you think would happen if I went to the store with my kids at 5,000 labels and we just started labeling it ourselves? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm tired of this.
People have done that. People have done that. Old folks have done that before you came about. So, okay? And I didn't, I just want to make it clear. I didn't say I had a law degree because I'm playing one-up games, all right? I said it because I was commenting on a legal question that was asked. So let's be straight about that, okay? All right. I would suggest going to, there's a magazine out there, the Non-GMO Food Source, whatever it's called. You got it there? Can you tell the, yeah, that's it. That's a good source. The Non-GMO Project website, www.non-GMO Project, certifies, if the manufacturer has submitted it, products that are not made with genetic engineering. Now, no certification, no label can guarantee.
Thank you, Danny. Just for you guys' information, I only started commercially farming 6 years ago, and I'm an old guy. It doesn't matter what age. It matters, again, perspective and frame of mind. My grandmother worked on a plantation. She worked hard to get her daughters, sons educated so they wouldn't have to work hard at farming. Since that time, the idea of farming, the meaning attached to farming is you work very long hours for very little pay and you have a terrible quality of life. That's not the truth. It's perspective again, information and perspective. Farmers were the first scientists. I believe that. You had to pay attention to your crop in order to survive. You had to pay attention to the weather in order to plan, long-term planning. That's what that grasshopper the ant thing is all about, right? You got to plant 3 months for the winter. That's the European growing cycle or the North American growing cycle. Anyway, 2 years ago, my son got laid off of construction. He came home, Dad, I want to join you on the farm. Shoot, father's dream, right? My mother calls him up. What are you going to do about a job? I'm going to farm with Dad. No, why don't you go find a trade? Like farming's not a trade. So that's the first step to making new farmers, is we got to get that mindset off that it's a poor paying job and it's backbreaking. My taro is growing right now. Well, might be dark outside. Well, if it's full moon, it's growing, right? Anyway, that's my point being, the weeds grow too, but wow. Anyway, that mindset, how do you afford to farm in Hawaii? Political activism. Large corporate farmers, large corporate entities, the state needs to get back control of the land. We got to get in touch with the LNR, the HHL, all of these guys as a body and tell them, look, lease rent's affordable, $100 an acre a year. $100 an acre a year. 3-acre parcels. What would your quality of life be if your house, and you got to be able to live on that place. How would your lifestyle be if you're housing $300 to $500 a year for your house, for a place to live? The rat race would be over. Nobody would be commuting on a traffic. You wouldn't see anybody on a freeway anymore. Your quality of life would be unreal, and you can do it at an older state. I'm involved with an entity who's trying to convince the LNR. This is where to go. They're actually very user-friendly. We're also even thinking of building communities so that this is a co-op sense where you have, like the plantation house, you have a housing and the farms radiate away from that. But we're also thinking of, okay, for a person with leased land, you have restrictive covenants. When you're not able to meet that restrictive covenant of farming the land, they evict you. So you work your butt off for 40 years, and all of a sudden, you cannot take care of 10 acres, so you're going to lose the place that you raise your children. So we're planning that too. Why not have the retirement community right within that same community? The schools within that same community. Homeschooling, whatever you call it, within that same. Back to the Ohana idea, they're doing it in Cuba. Because of all the sanctions that went on, the embargoes that went on, and the collapse of the USSR, I believe their highest export are teachers and doctors right now, because every little community is self-sustaining. They don't have to commute to Honolulu to go to college. They go to college. They get their education right there. Their hospitals are right there. If you got to go to the hospital, your family takes the food and changes the bed sheets. Of course, this might be some propaganda. You know, I don't know if it's that perfect. It sounds pretty darn perfect. But what I saw was this scenario in Cuba. A small island isolated from the world. Their fossil fuel input is very small. Their farming, their agriculture has gone back to oxen instead of tractors. So anyway, farming.
I'm sorry, and I hope I didn't offend anybody with that, but I just was trying to make a point that, so my last question, or put it out there, given that Hawaii is so small, and we have such a high concentration of corporate GE farming, is there a thought on the national level to focus all of the attention right here, so it kicks its ass and makes a national spotlight? Because we have such a small population that if we just really focus, the rest of the nation that didn't want GMOs, focus on educating Hawaii's kids, and one generation would definitely beat these guys up. But the current infrastructure doesn't support it. So is there any talk, or could there be some talk on the national level for that?
The issue is that in every state they feel the same way. Even the states with big populations the localities feel they can't get anywhere because the state is too big, right? This is why in California they went at the county level, because they couldn't get anything done at the state level. These feelings of isolation are part of the way they tend to manipulate us and keep us disempowered, okay? Believe me, on the mainland, people feel as much isolated. Yes, you're physically isolated for sure, but legally and in terms of the kind of sharing that I was talking about before, Hawaii is right there in the middle of the mix with everyone. Now, there are some interesting things going on at the national level. I'll just make a comment or two. For many, many years, Dennis Kucinich introduced a bill to require GE foods to be labeled. Eventually, Barbara Boxer in the Senate introduced a companion bill. Those bills haven't gotten anywhere. But lo and behold, and of course, as people, if you follow it, Kucinich was basically thrown into a district with another liberal and lost in the primary. Those bills have gotten increasing numbers of sponsors, okay? This is because people are organizing. I don't know if any Hawaii representative or senator is a sponsor. That's something you guys could work on. Excuse me?
I think the one that's retiring.
Okay. There was just a letter sent by members of the U.S. Congress, senators and representatives, to the FDA, saying that the FDA should use its existing powers to require GE foods to be labeled. Something like, I don't know what the number was, 30-something or what, it doesn't matter. A large number, given the fact of the power of the industry. Those representatives didn't do this on their own. They did this because people lobbied them incessantly, wrote letters and visited their offices and all the rest of the stuff. Okay? So at the national level, that's something that people in Hawaii can do, along with people in Connecticut and Washington and all the other states who are doing it also. So that's a way in which you're not isolated. You're part of a larger movement to affect the members of the U.S. Congress. So you can work on different levels simultaneously. You can work on the farm, supporting farm communities. You can work on whatever powers your county has. Maybe it's possible for county to pass, as Mendocino did, a GE-free zone. That's something that you could look into. And you could also work with others on the national level.
Aloha, my name is Nomi. And I wanted to say, first of all, for those of you that don't know, GMO labeling is required in at least 30 countries and more like 50 according to more recent sources. The entire European Union, Brazil, Russia, even China requires GMO labeling, and a lot of countries also have bans on them as well. It's something to really think about. We are our own lobbyists. We are not these corporations. They have money. They hire people like Alicia Malula-Fiti, who's the head of Hawaii Crop Improvement Association, with Fred Perrock, who's the president of Monsanto, to go down to the Capitol and lobby these people all day and all night. But we have a lot more people than just one or two good lobbyists from each GMO corporation. And so we are our own lobbyists, and we have to go down to the Capitol, and we have to call them, and we have to testify, and we have to speak up for it, because if we don't, they will pay someone else to speak in opposition. And this is for the future of our health and our safety and our ability to provide food for ourselves. So I wanted to mention that. And my question to you, and I hope that I can get an answer from each of you possibly, if you had to be brief and succinct and communicate what GMOs are, how bad they are, and what needs to be done, in one small piece of information, what's the most powerful phrase or concept or piece of information if I just have one sign that one person passing by sees one time that's going to stick in their mind and change the way they're acting and the way they're consuming, what would that be?
Go for it.
From my side, I don't think there's a magic word that you can say, because all change is internal. So I cannot say anything to convince anybody. All change is people that do their own research. So there's just too many angles. When I talk about the problems with GMOs, I talk about, well, there's the environment, there's the health, and there's the social aspect. And personally, I'm more concerned about the social issue. The fact that a few corporations want to control the global seed supply, the effect on communities. So my focus is more with the original comments made about sovereignty, whether this is national sovereignty, community sovereignty, or personal sovereignty, and in terms of controlling your food supply and the ability to have a say about how you lead your life, and you having a control over it rather than that being commanded from the outside.
Just trying to keep on the topic of labeling, I would just pound that issue home, that I have a right to know what I am spending my money on. I have a right to know. Very simple.
What if it was about more than just labeling, and it was about sovereignty and everything all tied together that needs to be done as far as you can see?
I think sovereignty is such a I mean, to me, it's common sense, but we have been, again, like the genetic industry, the food industry, we've been given so much disinformation in regards to sovereignty. Same thing with the food industry. So our perspective is formed. I used to teach at the charter school, and I used to hold up my kids, my hand, the front of my hand to the students, and I say, what do you guys see? And of course, young kids, they don't want to answer. I said, come on, simple. You see the palm of my hand. What do I see? I see the back of my hand. And we can argue all day long, and this goes to perspective and what he was talking about. These legislators aren't evil. Yes, the $2,000 campaign contribution is not swaying them, but they have this perspective. They're sitting over there. They don't have, when I talk to the students, I say, how do you get to consensus? You have to try and understand where this person is coming from, his education, his foundation in life, who raised him, how did he learn how to brush his teeth? It goes back to his foundation, his education and his experiences in life. And when you can do that, then you change your perspective. And now your job is to change his perspective by discussion, information, education about where you come from, your experiences in life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's that got to do with this? I forget. Basically, sovereignty, there's a lot of disinformation. For you to want to own sovereignty as far as a national sovereignty, it needs to be you. You need to go do the homework. You need to read the books, do the Facts Matter. That was written by Twig Smith. That's his perspective. He's a descendant of one of the people who took place in, he's a descendant of one of the traitors, okay? So, read the book. Read the book by the Queen. Read the new stuff that's coming out after that, Keanu Sai's dissertation, the Apology Bill. Read all the information, get the information, make that information your own, you will come out with your own opinion. Same as this genetically modified idea. To me, there's doubt. Even the scientists say, well, there's doubt. It could do this, it could do that. They're saying, no, it's only this way. I don't trust them. If it smells like that and it tastes like that, then it's probably that. Or there's the other olelo noyao or more olelos that talk about if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. Well, the disinformation is out there, and for us, we need to gather that information and make our own informed decision, but labeling is part of getting informed. But I do believe, if we're going to err, if something is going to happen, then we should err on the part of caution. Precautionary principles. They know what that word is. You guys know what that word is. It is in research. It is the basis of most research, except for genetically modified foods. There's no precautionary principles. Throw it out there on the field year after year after year. And basically that's why they're here in Hawaii, because we're so isolated. If they ruin this place, they can go away. We got to live with it. That's sorry. I hope that has something to do with it. That wasn't brief, though.
I would use the concept of power and disempowerment, which actually relates to both of the previous comments. This is probably the fundamental concept I try to convey to my students when we talk about public policy. It's an issue of power, and so I'll use a fancy word and I'll talk about personal autonomy, but autonomy, but living in community. I don't mean autonomy that we're each isolated like billiard balls or something like that. I mean that we each have the requisite power, for example, to control what goes into our bodies. For example, to know what's happening in our environment and to be able to influence that and determine that. For example, to be able to participate truly in governance. So I think that if I had to give a concise answer, I would pin it to power and the disempowerment of people and somehow trying to reestablish individual autonomy, but in a sense of the collective good, not a kind of, maybe some of you came across this. It used to be very fashionable to cite an essay by this biologist Garrett Hardin called The Tragedy of the Commons. Anyway, how many people here have ever read or heard of The Tragedy of the Commons? Okay. The tragedy of the commons, according to Garrett Hardin, is that if you have something in common, each of the people, like the medieval commons in Europe, each of the people who had the ability to use it, like the farmers who could pasture their cows on it, would have an incentive to use it all up as much as they could. They'd be greedy and disrespect the other commoners. Now, the fact of the matter is that commons have existed for millennia, and people who use the commons don't screw it up because they, one, understand the collective good, and two, they understand that the good of all of them depends upon maintaining the commons, not ending it. And historically, Garrett Hardin is wrong. The commons in Western Europe failed because of conscious legislation that the increasing numbers of squires and nobility got the parliaments to pass to enclose the commons and to terminate by force the right of the commons. So what you want our goal should be to act the way that people did when they lived and were nourished by the commons, not the way people lived and act after industrial capitalism began to take hold and people privatized communal resources. The gene pool, and this is a politically sensitive thing to state, but so I'll tell you why. But the gene pool should be looked at as a collective resource of all humanity. Now, this is what's politically sensitive about it, and I do believe it, but what you have to understand when you say that is that many indigenous peoples say, yeah, that's what the corporations tell us when they come to get their share and rip us off. Okay, so many of them refuse to abide by that notion that it's a collective good of people. Now, according to international law, in Rio de Janeiro 20 years ago, when one of the things that they also did was to adopt the Convention on Biological Diversity. And in the Convention of Biological Diversity, people who were supporting the notion of a commons and diversity in general, and after all, biological diversity is a form of commons, right? Want some important things. But indigenous peoples lost big because the diversity of a region, no matter how much it had been tended to and protected by indigenous peoples in terms of cultivation and whatever, was legally held to be the property or the right of the nation state, not the indigenous community. And then a whole very elaborate system of what was called access and benefit sharing was adopted, the idea, but it's been 20 years of intense negotiations and they still have not settled it out. Because it's easy for the powerful corporations to want access. Let's get that rare, drought-tolerant corn that's in Africa and let's get its gene. But how to share the benefits is a very different thing. Now, on a cultural level, the adoption of that policy is a victory for Western ideology over indigenous cultures, because it proclaims that these things can be owned. You know, before this, we had the stories of the corporations going around to indigenous villages and saying basically, take me to your shaman, and then trying to get the shaman to give them the knowledge, and they would say, oh, we'll cut you in, we'll give you a share of it. They didn't understand that in most indigenous cultures, these people are custodians of knowledge, not owners of knowledge. They have an obligation to their community, not a right against their community. We're talking about a kind of intellectual, cultural imperialism, okay? And that is, I think, been very much lost. I don't think that battle, it can be really won in a way. But making sure, at the very least, that people in these various communities who have maintained these common goods, and I don't mean by that in a commercial sense, I mean they are good. They're good. Different varieties of animals, of plants with special properties, that somehow they are not just cast aside in the exploitation of these resources. And that's an ongoing thing. Hawaii is very much blessed with very special indigenous resources. You've also have experienced invasions of exotics that have really completely transformed this environment. Still looks nice to me, but after all, I'm a mainlander. What do I know?
Aloha. My name is Juanita. Aloha Hector. Aloha Danny. And aloha Dr. Phil.
I can just be Phil.
Okay. So, Phil, you are quoting book and verse to a community that is living exactly the story of the commons you are talking about with regards to the Hawaiian culture and the system that we created as indigenous people and that existed to provide 1 million or more people with good, organic, healthy food, and then was overtaken by that Western philosophy. So everything that you're saying is like a light bulb going off in every Hawaiian across the state of Hawaii and throughout the universe. They fully understand the concept that you're seeing, and we do know that as a people, we can start to help all the people in the state of Hawaii. But we step forward first because we're the victim at this point. We were the first to be impacted. And that's why I agree with Danny when he says, and all the Hawaiians out there that are saying, it is through our community to organize and to get down there and talk with all these levels, from the neighborhood board to the governor to our federal Congress, all the way up to the president who was born in Hawaii, right? So we do have options here, and it isn't as bleak and challenging as some might think. We just have to realize everything takes time. All these things didn't happen in a moment. It happened over a long period of time based on that thought where you said this evolution occurred, these changes happened. So
Can I just comment that I agree completely, of course, but Hawaii in this sense is not unique, because when I do my work with my African colleagues, for example, in fighting against the Gates Foundation, this is true all throughout Africa with dozens of discrete communities, hundreds, etc., etc.
Why the Hawaiians are at the UN.
Yes, that's exactly why I said before that it's really important to do some international exchange of all these ideas so we realize we're not isolated. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. So just to bring you up to speed, we're knowledgeable about some of these issues.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
We appreciate the ideas that are coming because we're looking for precedents everywhere. We believe in precedents coming from other places. That's how we can really start to lay foundation down to move forward. My question, I have a few, if that's okay. What kinds of legal documents can indigenous people ask for regarding the GMO overthrow? Are there any precedents out or around the other 49 states, Bill, that you're aware of, or around the world that we can utilize here in Hawaii?
There are numerous GMO-free zones. The document that I referred you to, the URL, has a list of them. in the appendix. And these are places which, I don't know exactly what you mean by overthrow the GM zone, but rule. But of course, these are done with the powers on the other side pushing back. You know what I mean? This is a dynamic situation. But you certainly can look. There are conferences held periodically, especially in Europe, where there are many, many, many GMO-free communities. 6 countries have in Europe, in the European Union, have declared themselves to be GMO-free, etc. Many provinces in Italy, for example. So there are lots of other communities that are doing this. Now that's on the non-growing usually. I mean, there are different ways of talking about overthrowing this thing. Labeling, I mean, maybe it's not grown here, but you still don't want it being in the stores. You don't want your kids to eat it, etc. So, I mean, there are different facets of that kind of thing. The labeling was referred to before. Yeah, it's 50 countries, I think, if you count all 27 of the EU individually, and they do have some individual laws on this. The labeling requirements from the different countries vary greatly. In the European Union, something cannot be considered GMO-free if it has more than 0.9%, in other words, less than 1% of total GM materials in it. In Japan and South Africa can have up to 5%. That's a huge difference. Huge, huge difference. Again, I wanted to emphasize that no country could legislate that it has to have 0. You can't have a 0 threshold because there's been too much contamination already. So anyway, you need to figure out which is the particular problem that you want to approach.
Okay. A comment is that we do currently have resolutions and bills that have been proposed here in the state. One in particular, Dr. Yee and various others got together to talk with Representative Hano to pass a resolution because we couldn't get acknowledgement for a bill. So we know this, we know our system that we're trying to follow to open doors, to get things rolling. And the one that we did was kind of morphed, which I was just curious, I'm sure you've seen it in other states and watched it happen throughout, where we come forward asking for a GMO labeling bill, GMO labeling resolution, and then they come back to us and they say, how about you look at GMO free or non-GMO? Because then you can kind of categorize it in the health industry as, you know, gluten-free or fat-free, and it's not as strong an impact. What's your take?
Well, as I said, you can't, I mean, it's hard to claim that something is GMO-free because it's probably not okay? It might be really pure, it might not hurt your health, but it might have some GMO materials in it. So that's the one thing. Now, uniformly, since the 1990s, at least for almost 20 years, surveys taken of the American public, uniformly by industry as well as media groups, show approximately 95% of people want GM food labels. 94 in a Syngenta study, 93 in another, but you get the idea, okay? Now, there are lots of things, there aren't lots of things, but there are a few things that you get huge numbers of people, if you ask them the right question, in favor of, like universal health care. And it doesn't mean that we're going to get it because a lot of people want it, all right? Okay. All right, and I defer to, obviously, comments made previously by others in this. The point, let me just say, the point is why haven't we gotten this one? Because 2/3 or 3/4 or more of the people who are then asked the second question, what would you do if food was labeled, they would say, I don't want to buy it. I wouldn't buy it. Okay? That's what's going on here. It's a much more simple situation than it is with healthcare, believe me. All right? So, labeling and so forth is an area of struggle. The industry is really committed to it. It's something that may be less threatening because you can present it to your legislators as a health measure, as an environmental measure, et cetera, et cetera. Up until about a year or two ago, there was not much action on the state level in the U.S. to get these kind of bills. People were working on counties and stuff like that. Then a number of, and largely I think they were dissuaded by that Vermont decision that I referred to you earlier. But I think a number of environmental attorneys got together and saw ways around that. And at the current, this current year, approximately 18 U.S. states, legislation has been attempted. Okay. I know that people in my own state, some of them were, I will use the term naive, and I don't mean it in a negative or bad way. They were just not aware, and they expected, oh, to get a bill, it's going to be passed, okay? Without realizing that some bills for very good things can come up year after year after year after year until they build up momentum. We just got same-sex marriage in Washington State. I know Hawaii was the original location for that whole concept when 6 couples went to your Supreme Court. You never got it to stick, but that was, at any rate, we had to go, it took us 20 years to get non-discrimination against gays and lesbians. 20 years in what's supposed to be a progressive state, you know? They just had the one person at the right place who could, you know, stop it. It only took us 4 or 5 years to get marriage equality, okay? But you cannot expect that something that is going to upset a major, powerful industry is going to be easy or come immediately. The fact that it's going on in 40% of the states simultaneously is wonderful. You know, they've got to run around with all their high-paid lobbyists. It's great.
I put the same question to Danny, what their thoughts are on GMO labeling versus GMO-free or non-GMO.
I don't, personally, I don't like the idea. I think it's up to the companies that are producing the product. It's their responsibility to inform the consumer. Our product contains GM crops. It shouldn't be to the farmer that is not producing it to label it.
I think keep it simple. I think again, what our esteemed Dr.
Phil.
It's been a long day. Said, you know, it possibly is impossible to find most of the products on our shelves, processed food, that will be 100%, except for Homestead Poi, my son's brand. But even, you know, poi in general, the commercial Honolulu poi, they import almost 1/3 of the taro to make that. So I don't know what they're doing with that taro before it comes here. I don't believe it's been genetically modified, but anyway, I think, you know, again, to put more disinformation on the label like GMO free, you know, the percentile, putting a percentile on there potentially has under something like that. It could get very complicated. I don't know. I just want to know, as far as I can, the potential for long-term health effects. I'd like to be able to find that out and make a decision on in some way. So I wouldn't have the answer as to how you're going to do that on the label, but something needs to be on that label to give me some information so that I can make an informed decision.
You know, my thought is that the purpose of GMO labeling would also assist us in helping track the identity of issues that we are having with health concerns.
Exactly, exactly.
Is that correct? Both agree? Do you think that's
Yes.
where, I mean, is that a major thing that we can actually put out there, and are other states and countries saying that's a big deal to them?
Yeah, there was a big, there's a UN agency that deals with food laws, international food laws, although it's called the Codex Alimentarius, although the results of its work are really just recommendations. No country has to abide by them. And I was involved in many, many years of struggle around, it's called traceability, this whole notion. And one of the strongest reasons that we always would argue for had to do with the public health benefits and tracing, which they do in other foods, right? But of course, for it to be successful, you have to have labeling at the tail end, at the consumer end, and this was where the objections came to. But yes, that is a very important, and of course, the U.S. diet seems to be implicated in a whole number of increasing issues and concerns. I mean, the notion of traceability is one I think that increasingly people see as very sensible. Yeah.
No, what about alternative, if I may? You know, if you do have the organic, USDA organic label on it, definitely it does not, can't have GMO in it, so.
That is legally true. Again, there's the contamination issue. Now, when the USDA first proposed their organic label, they said that foods could be labeled organic even if they were fertilized by sewer sludge, they were irradiated, or they contained genetic engineering. The USDA got 275,000 comments, the largest number to date that it had ever gotten on any issue whatsoever, opposing that. It was forced to hold 3 hearings. One of them was in Seattle. We had a ball with demonstrations and all the rest of it. And the USDA caved in on all 3. Now, as a result, there really are not precise definitions, again, given the contamination, as to what that means. Again, don't think, buying organic, something labeled organic, is probably the best way you have currently to avoid GM. Or shopping at a store, we have stores in the mainland that will only carry foods that they get certification from the manufacturers, again, that are not made with GM. Or foods that are certified by this non-GMO project that I mentioned, which began about 3-4 years ago. So of course, it's still only a small portion of the total amount of food that's been certified and so forth. But those are the best ways to avoid eating GM food. But again, there's no way to make sure that not a molecule gets in your system.
And I have my last question, which is, can we implement GMO labeling via introducing the definition simply through the FDA and the USDA? Can we petition our legislators or Congress people? Is there a movement in Washington coming up? I'm asking these questions because right now, the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party, which I am a member of and a citizen advocate for, passed a resolution amongst our group to go ahead and go forward with GMO labeling. And so we're working inch by inch through an autonomous, like we were talking about trying to do things collectively in a larger group, but being in an autonomous group within that collection. And that's what we're doing through the Democratic Party. The Environmental Caucus is autonomous, so they can sit there and make statements that the whole Democratic Party doesn't necessarily, cannot come in and stop us from making this statement as our own group, so we're autonomous. So I'm asking these questions so that I can take this resolution to a state convention in front of all of our Democrats throughout the state and ask them to please honor this resolution as a state Democratic Party. If we can do that, I watched last year, we went through this process with resolution within the party, got it all approved, and now it's passed as a bill through the legislature this year to allow for local feed mills. We started with a small group within a big party who agreed to it, and I'm hoping that you can, all this information is going to really help us move it forward to a bigger mass of people, 65,000 of them, to try and help us understand people want to go in this direction. Can you please get us moving forward? So, again, my question was,
Well, I mentioned already the letter to the FDA that a large number of senators and representatives signed. I don't recall whether anyone from Hawaii was on it. You said that Senator Akaka was. So you could contact his office and get the letter, and then I'm sure most, if not all of them, were Democrats, unfortunately. I guess Republicans don't eat. Okay. But at any rate, you certainly could bring that to the caucus and sort of say, hey, why doesn't Hawaii get, this is not any radical thing. This is mainstream. Look, Senator so-and-so is on it. Barbara Boxer. If you can't locate it quickly enough, Boxer's office, I'm sure we'll be able to, Barbara Boxer will get it for you.
thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Farias, and this question is for Phil Bariano.
Thank you.
I agree with you that our legislators need to have backbones. My personal belief is also that they need help sometimes in relation to making the right decisions.
Definitely.
So my question to you is, as far as Washington State is concerned, to what extent does the group that is pushing for GMO labeling get involved in active politics, active
Sure.
political activism?
Sure. We only educate, of course, as all 501c3s only educate. But so, for example, the Speaker of the Washington State House of Representatives is someone I've known for 20-some-odd years, okay? He used to be a community organizer. So I contacted him. These bills came up. He wasn't familiar with them. Of course, there are so many bills that come up. I set up an appointment with him. His politics are very progressive, and there was no problem on that ground. But he doesn't know anything about GM. He doesn't know anything about it. So he told me that he was going to have a staffer follow this, and we had hearings on the Senate bill and on the House bill, and that staffer was at both of them. And then I prepared a memo subsequently, a legal policy memo, to the staffer. And what I'm going to do, and I've already mentioned this to the Speaker and to the staffer at the time, our legislature is a part-time, meets every year, but for varying lengths and so forth, is to ask them to hold an educational session, which they do periodically, let's say in the fall, to educate larger numbers of legislators before the session begins, because the bills are going to come back. That kind of thing. Yeah, and I think, in addition, of course, people are contacting individual legislators. So, as I said to you, it was the largest, second largest number of communications that they received this whole session was on this issue. And so legislators all around the state are now sensitized to the issue where they weren't before, but they probably don't know a lot. We need to get accurate. I've always maintained that given the power of the other side, our strongest weapon is speaking the truth. We need to be accurate. We don't need to be hysterical. The facts are bad enough or good enough, however you want to look at it. And unfortunately, there are people who stretch some of the stuff because they don't understand the limits of it. They read about one scientific study and all of a sudden they're out there making a claim. Well, one scientific study gives you questions. It doesn't give you answers until the study is replicated, until other permutations around it have been investigated. So we need to get solid information. There's enough solid information out there for them to invoke the precautionary principle that Danny mentioned. And If you're talking about labeling, there are all these other reasons about, I want to know what I'm putting in my body. I want to know how it's been processed. We have labels about all kinds of things. Was it made with prison labor or not? I mean, the idea, the U.S. government in the international meetings, it took us 18 years at the Codex, by the way, to get a document finally passed last summer that recognized that countries can adopt labeling of GMO legislation. And the important thing about Codex rules is that they are a defense in the WTO. So no country now is going to be dragged to the WTO by the U.S. because they have labeling. Okay? Wow. And the U.S. fought this bitterly, as you can imagine, all right? So we already went through all the different reasons for it, and you just need to educate. It's allowed. When we were at the testimony, one of the industry flags or ag council, whatever, from the wheat council or something, said, this is going to lead Washington corporations to have WTO problems. You need to have the information to get up and to tell them that that is not so. I would use a stronger language, but I don't know everyone in the room. You need to have those facts. People need to have those facts.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Lax, and my question is for you, Phil, or maybe a comment. I noticed, I know you're not a biologist, but I noticed online that you seem to probably have good information about marker-assisted selection.
I don't. I'm sure that Hector knows more about it than I do.
Hector, can you take a couple minutes and talk to us about that, and if you think that it could possibly replace genetic engineering?
So marker-assisted selection is part of molecular biology, and it's a technique that is allowing breeders and researchers to identify genes that may be beneficial because they have disease resistance or so on. So this is a claim that critics of GMO are saying we can actually use this science for a good purpose. So we can use the science of molecular biology to actually use these techniques to identify some of the proper genes that we can actually use from tomato to make the tomato a better plant.
But not with genetic engineering.
No, not with the genetic engineering.
So use selective breeding. So it's like what farmers did over the millennia, only using some of the modern scientific tools. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So
so then you would breed those tomatoes. So you find, as in fact they're doing right now in Africa, because of the threat from this WEMA, farmers are saying, "Hey, we've got drought-tolerant corn." And they're growing it, and they're publicizing that, and they're offering the seeds to others and so forth. So that is not using the techniques of molecular biology, using the techniques of farmer biology. But it's a similar kind of approach. And since it's all within the same species, you don't run any of the kinds of problems that many of us have been talking about.
So if you go to Africa, to many of these countries that we're looking for superior varieties, in most cases, the varieties already exist. They're already available for the extension service and universities. And the main problem is one of access. So they may be in the central capital, but they're not 400 miles to where the farmer needs it. And so it's an issue of social access and inequality, and that poor farmers cannot access seed that is available in another town. So the varieties are actually there or can be developed through classical breeding.
Then we take a break.
Thank you very much. My name is Donna Lay, and I work for Senator Mike Gabbard. And he has actually, and I apologize, I had my wisdom tooth this morning, that's why I can't talk properly. But he's actually he's introduced over the years a number of GMO labeling bills that have never, made it into law. But, since I work in his office, I field some of the calls and stuff. And, people are asking, well, what can we do to help? And one of the things that for any bills that anybody wants passed, what is always recommended is to actually contact your own legislator where you live and tell them that I support this bill. And they're the people that they listen to. And because they're the ones that's going to elect them. So anyway, I just wanted to add that because that was mentioned earlier. And I'd also like to ask, Melissa mentioned that there's a bill, a resolution that's coming up on April 25th, and she said, talk about testifying, but maybe, some of us work and can't be there. If you could guide us as to, like, can we submit testimony online and that kind of stuff, and maybe tell us a little bit about how we can help in that way. But thank you very much. I've learned a lot today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of our presentation, and I know all of us have many more questions in our minds, and there may be a little bit of frustration that nothing happened this year, but I try to look at it from a positive point of view, that nothing is accomplished overnight, and we have been very successful in awakening people in just the last few years, because more information is coming out on the internet, other places, and so people are becoming more aware. So I want to leave everybody with a note of hope, and not only hope, but a possibility that you can actually get engaged. And because we have this resolution coming up April 25th, there's something that you can do instead of just walking away from here thinking, well, it's over. You can actually submit testimony to the City Hall, and if you put your name on our email list, then we can keep you informed of our strategies that we're using to call the different council members. And on the 19th of April, the agenda will come out for that meeting on April 25th. And you can go to honolulu.gov and find out when that resolution is where that resolution is going to be placed on the agenda, so that you won't have to wait 6 hours before you can testify. And you can also testify online, so you can submit your testimony. Even 2 paragraphs is very significant, because they like to see the numbers and they like to see what district you're from. So as Donna was saying, it's very important that you say, I'm from Pearl City, I'm from Wahiawa, you as my representative, my council member, really should be supporting this resolution, because we, the people out here, are becoming more aware of it, being a threat to our food supply, and therefore, if we begin with labeling, then at least that's a start. And because this is an election year, we as the people out here in the audience have enormous power to vote in new legislators. New council members, if we've already seen their track record is in favor of GMO, yes, we can educate them in the next legislative session, but we need to start right now by voting the really bad guys out. And so that's obvious. It has to be done. We've been so complacent and allowed them to do whatever they wanted. And we've seen this year so many bills that were passed that were against the public will, the people's will. So therefore, you have to take the power back into your own hands. And therefore, I'm really happy that we were able to have this panel today. So in conclusion, I'd like each one of you to share a little bit about what we can look forward to in the future. And I'd just like to remind you that we do have another panel on Monday at the Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii. So if your friends weren't able to come today, please invite them, and please come back again, because you can ask your question then. So let's have each one of you conclude.
One message that I would give is that communities all over the world are actually standing up and saying we don't accept GMOs. This is part of the social forum movement, and the main message is we do not accept your world. And people were asking about a keyword or a short word that summarizes everything, and that is a better world is possible. And we're actually going to make it ourselves through a process of sovereignty based on our own communities.
Just want to thank you folks all again, and Dr. Yee for getting you all together and organizing it. And life is good. Live it well, enjoy it, and get your perspectives in order. People say time is money. I say time is priceless. If I waste a second getting paid for something, to do something that I prefer not to do, then I can't buy that second back. It's gone forever. And that money, it won't last long. So in quality of life, try and get your affairs in order. We live in paradise. Enjoy it. Please help each other keep this place livable for future generations. Thank you.
I'll close with a short story because it addresses some concerns that were raised earlier. In the late 1980s, I was on the board of what was the first NGO to deal with these issues, called the Council for Responsible Genetics. And the U.S. Supreme Court had come down with a decision in a case called Chakrabarty, which indicated 5-4 that a genetically engineered microbe could be patented. And people on this board, we were biologists and non-biologists, thought that this decision indicated some real troubles ahead. So we spent an afternoon during one of our meetings. We were from around the country, so we would meet like 3 times a year or twice a year in Boston. We spent the whole afternoon coming up with a statement against patents on life. And at the end of the Saturday afternoon, 5 o'clock, we were having wine and cheese, you know, for all of our efforts and everything. And I remember clearly one of the people saying, "Do you think anyone in the world will ever care what the 13 of us spent an afternoon doing?" Fast forward to the streets of Seattle in 1999 and the WTO meetings and all of the demonstrations in the streets. There were thousands of signs being held from people from all different parts of the world reading "No patents on life." Okay? So, small groups organize, and by the way, it's not because of what the CRG did that someone in Korea or South Africa knew about this. It's that the idea gets magnified, people talk to their neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to say to you guys, keep up the good work. I mean, it's great. Don't get discouraged. You're part of a very large movement that is growing, and one day we will be successful. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dr. Hector Valenzuela, Danny Bishop, and Dr. Phil Bariano for being here tonight. Let's give them another hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's leave on a note of self-empowerment, that we walk away with the knowledge that we've learned today and we share it with other people. And just like when you drop a stone into the water, those rings spread out into the community. And our first place to start showing that we are empowered is April 25th. We will continue again next year with the state legislature. It's obvious they need to be educated. Your own congressperson who's taking money from the Monsanto companies needs to be educated. They have only heard the other side because the other side spoke very loudly with the money. But you have the power through your knowledge, through your commitment to the people of Hawaii to be able to make a difference. So let's leave here with a high note of expectation that we will be successful in the future. And thank you again for coming today.